Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name is Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. This week, I am joined once again by, he's been on a million times. We always have a good time. We always have the longest episodes when he's on. It's Michael Walsh. Hi, Mikey.
I think we should have Mad Max nicknames for this episode.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
it'd
we're going to
easy,
talk about Mad Max this week.
be easy to call you the podcaster, but I think we could probably do better. Something.
The definite article podcaster.
Microphone.
Cardigan. I was going to say it has to be cardigan related.
Cardigan.
Just the word cardigan.
It even works. Cardigan.
Great. It would be spelled car, D-I-G-G-U-N or I-N apostrophe. Cardigan. Anyway, who cares? And yours, of course, would be bean counter. I don't know. You're from Boston. That's all I could think of. Anyway, who cares? This week we are, in fact, talking about Mad Max. We're talking about Furiosa. We're talking about the entire saga of Mad Max and the Wasteland and everything like that. And as we are recording this, Furiosa just had its opening weekend, which was Memorial Day weekend, which is one of the most infamously tepid Memorial Day weekends ever, maybe the most. Furiosa ended up winning the weekend, but not by a lot. I think they really it really underperformed, I guess is what I should say.
Yeah, I think lowest number one movie in like 41 years. I think
it was like only 20 some million. It barely beat out Garfield the movie. Which again, kids go see, kids and families go see movies, and Furiosa is not for kids and families, but it's upsetting because I think both of us really enjoyed that movie. And I think given the amount of press that Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth as well as George Miller were doing, you would think that I think maybe they thought it wasn't going to be a big hit, and or I don't know, like it felt like they were hedging their bets a little bit, or at least like maybe trying to bump up knowledge of it. But I saw somebody say, and I don't think this should be the case, but like people didn't necessarily care about a Mad Max movie without Mad Max or without Charlize Theron, who played Furiosa initially. And I don't think, honestly, and we can get into this, of course, I don't think the Mad Max movies are great because of Max. I think they're great because of the world. And Furiosa, which you don't really know until you see it, is so much about the world of the wasteland, and specifically like literally showing you this is Australia. This is the middle of the Australian desert. Which has never, fully been said before. It's always been fairly obvious, but yeah, so like, I mean, Mad Max is a cool like silhouette, and the car is definitely cool, but like, I don't know, like to me, like Max is not the draw for the movies. It's the world, but maybe I'm in the minority on that. What do you think?
No, I mean, look, there's lots of reasons movies succeed or fail that have nothing to do with the movies themselves. And, this could just be a fluke, right?
Yeah.
This could just be a fluky weekend. And maybe this movie has a long tail, and by the end, the box office looks exactly where everybody expected it to look. Maybe not. I don't know who went and saw Fury Road that was like under 25, that only went because it said Mad Max. And I don't know who liked Fury Road but didn't go see Furiosa because it lacked Mad Max. Like,
yeah,
who's that person, right? Where's that group? Like, I guess maybe older fans who were 20 when the original movies came out, maybe they held it against it, that it wasn't specifically a Mad Max movie. But if they went and saw Fury Road and liked it, that wasn't really a Mad Max movie either. He's at best the co-lead, but that's not his movie. That's Furiosa's movie. It's her plan, it's her plot, it's her scheme. She's the one driving the action. That's no pun intended. So I don't see how you could be like, oh yeah, I love Fury Road, but they're not going to include Mad Max. I'm out. Like, I would have watched any movie George Miller followed up Fury Road with in the Wasteland. Anything he wanted to make, any character. except for maybe some of those annoying kids from Thunderdome. Any character, he's like, this is the next movie I would have been in on, and I don't see how anybody could have felt differently if they loved Fury Road.
Right. Yeah, it's a very strange sort of, because I remember there was a lot of like talk after Fury Road came out that Mad Max is not even the main character, and like that was a bad thing. And it's like, I guess, but like who, I just, first of all, I think he's in it plenty. Like but he's not, he's the he's the protagonist without being the hero, I guess is what I kind of, he's like our character to go in and learn about all this stuff, and he helps, and he, he basically like, yeah, he's the co-lead, but he is the, he's the trickster essentially, who comes in and kind of, helps and then goes on. Like that's what he does in all of the movie. The only Mad Max movie that is about Mad Max, about Max Rokitansky, is the first one. Because even the Road Warrior is about this fabled guy who came in and helped these people who needed it, and same with Beyond Thunderdome. He's this wastelander who just happened to show up, and all of these movies, with the exception of the first one, are very much just sort of people's recollections of what happened, or like passed down from the oral tradition of talking about this guy who, that's why he's different in every movie, and also like isn't really like, he's just sort of a figure. Like it doesn't matter who Max is anymore. I don't think, like, the fact that he was a police officer in the first movie is not important in any of the other movies. It's just sort of, that's what he looks like, because whatever. So that's where I kind of go with those. Like I think the Wasteland is so much more interesting, and knowing that they spent so much time developing the story and the backstory of everything for Fury Road, that they had basically all of Furiosa ready to go. And it just took a decade. It seems weird to think that Mad Max Fury Road was 10 years ago, or almost 10 years ago.
I know it feels like it came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, totally.
And maybe that's because I've watched it a billion times since then. Especially I still have cable. I'm of that age where I just like to channel surf. It's been on HBO a lot, and anytime I come across it, I stick around. Just like, oh, this scene's coming up. Oh, that scene's coming up. So yeah, it's, and maybe that's what we're underestimating, is that it has actually been a long time.
Yeah,
9 years is a long time between movies, and that's a whole new generation of people who can buy movie tickets on their own, who maybe didn't actually see Fury Road and don't have that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I was gonna say, and then they're hearing, oh, it's not as good as Fury Road. Okay, well, let's address that, right? Because
it isn't.
Saying something's not as good as Fury Road is essentially meaningless, because very few movies ever made, and not just action movies, any movie, very few movies ever made of any kind are as good as Fury Road. That's not a standard we should be holding Furiosa to. And if you go into that with that standard, of course you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a poison chalice, to use a very highfalutin term, because like,
I like it.
Thank you. Like Mad Max Fury Road like came out of nowhere. Miller hadn't made a Mad Max movie since 1985. There had been a lot of, which we can get into, like rip-off kind of wastelandy type movies, especially in the 80s. And it just seemed like, we're doing another Mad Max movie. Like Mad Max seemed like a relic but when that was getting ready to come out, and then it comes out and it's the best movie. Like it's so good. Like I'm still like very annoyed that The Revenant beat it as best picture, and that Miller didn't win best director. I hate The Revenant. I'll just go on record. I think The Revenant is so overrated.
Unless you are really into trees and snow, I don't see how anybody can love that movie. I totally agree with you. That was, I do not like that movie, and it's got a couple Oscars it does not deserve. A couple of important Oscars it does not deserve.
No, and you can't look at, like, I don't know. It's just like, oh, they really shot outside, and it really looked like he was going through. It's like, yeah, that's not interesting to me. Like when you, anyway, doesn't matter. But so it made a lot of money, but it didn't make as much money as people thought it was going to. But because it got all those Oscar nominations, like word of mouth kept building that entire summer, and like it, got re-released and like all this stuff, and it just sort of became part of the zeitgeist. in a way that I don't think anybody realized was going to happen. And then it was like, oh, now there's going to be more Mad Max movies. And like George Miller was like 70 years old and now he's 80 years old. And it's obviously COVID didn't help. I mean, what did it help besides just padding people's coffers who had a lot of money to begin with? But it's sort of, yeah, it's disingenuous to be like, oh, it underperformed because people aren't excited about another Mad Max movie. It's like, no, I don't think it's that. I think it was sort of lightning in a bottle, because even the original trilogy did not, like, they weren't like big hits. Like, they didn't even release the first Mad Max over here until well after the Road Warrior came out. That's why it's called the Road Warrior, because it was called Mad Max 2 in Australia, and we never had Mad Max 1, so there's no reason to call it that. So they had to call it the Road Warrior. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm really driving at, but I think like,
I think I think the point you're making, and I think it's the right one, is that these movies kind of have a bigger cultural footprint than they necessarily do a box office
yeah,
return. And this is something that we deal with our job sometimes, is that we can, and I'm not saying these movies exist in a bubble, they don't, but sometimes we can see all the people who cover pop culture talking about the same thing because they all like it, and we don't necessarily recognize immediately. It takes a few weeks or so, or even longer, to realize it hasn't kind of broken outside of that bubble. In the same way that there are other shows like that, like Yellowstone never really breaks into the pop culture bubble, but it's this massive series outside of it.
mm-hmm,
So I think like people will see, people watch the Deadpool and Wolverine trailer and they see that there's like a little Mad Max parody in there, a little Fury Road parody, and I think they get it even if they have not necessarily seen Fury Road,
mm-hmm.
and definitely haven't seen it 17 times like we have. So I don't know how to break through that. I do think that Warner Brothers was behind this movie. I
Yeah.
think that their stars and the director are behind this movie. It definitely feels like it has been promoted about as much as any movie I can remember recently.
Do you want to know
And
how much it was promoted? I got to interview them. Me. That's how low they're going.
oh, give yourself some credit.
I know, it's fun to be
Don't do that to
self-deprecating.
yourself, Cardigan.
All right. Thanks, Beans.
I don't like that one at all.
I
Come
don't
on, that's
like
not
it
even
either.
wastelandy. I mean,
No.
there are some bad nicknames in the wasteland, as we found out with Piss Boy and Furiosa,
Yes, boy. Yeah.
which I think replaces Pig Killer, right? Does that take the top spot for the last moniker you would want?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go through. He's one of the bad guys, but Toe Cutter is not a particularly cool name.
I think if you're a bad guy, it is, because it's like just mysterious enough and menacing enough without being like giving away the whole thing. Like Toe Cutter. What do you, how'd you get that nickname? Right? Like, how much worse does it get?
Yeah, that's true. Fair. Yeah, we'll come up. You'll have a good one by the end of the episode. I've decided that's going to be my metatextual thing that I'm going to be doing while we're talking, is just not paying attention to you. I'm just kidding.
I find that's sometimes the best way to deal with me.
But I purposely went into see Furiosa without. I didn't rewatch Fury Road, even though it had been. I mean, I've seen it a bunch of times, but it's one of those movies where I don't watch it all the time because, like some of my favorite movies, like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or The Third Man, or certain movies that that mean a lot to me, like personally or whatever, and that I get a lot out of. I don't want to run out of like times if you know what I mean? Like I want to savor every time I watch it. So it's like, for example, I have seen Lawrence of Arabia 3 times. All 3 times have been on the big screen, which is, I was like, at one point I bought the Blu-ray and I was just like, who am I kidding? I'm never going to watch this at home. Like, I've seen Lawrence of Arabia 3 times on the big screen. Like, what am I doing? So, anyway, all of that is to say, so I didn't rewatch Fury Road because I also wanted to give it its best shot on its own. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to taint my enjoyment, but you can't help but watch it and go, okay, the effects don't look quite as good. It's very clearly a little more CGI heavy than Fury Road was, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's still amazing action in it. Like the big, huge, I think it's called the stowaway sequence in the middle, about midway through the movie, or maybe a little less than midway, but which is just this huge action sequence that takes place on the war rig. We're going to talk about it assuming nobody has seen it, because I think that's probably reasonable at this point. But there's this huge sequence which reportedly took 78 days to film, and that's such a long time to shoot one action sequence.
It was worth it. That not only is
it's
that
so good.
not is that one of my favorite sequences ever. I had to, as it was going on, remind myself. And I'm a quiet moviegoer. I don't want people clapping. It's not there. There's nobody here to necessarily hear the applause, right? I had to remind myself during that sequence: do not stand up at the end of this and clap. You are an adult. You know how to behave. But I was
Yeah.
just like it kept going, and it was so good. I would say that I think that sequence is as good as anything in Fury Road, even if it's maybe smaller compared to some of its equivalent scenes in Fury Road. I still think it's just as good.
It's very, very good. And I think what's really interesting about Furiosa compared to the other three is that it is a story about a person's life, and also like it is about this world and everything like that. It's a completely different style of storytelling than the other movies, and especially Fury Road, which is effectively one extended action sequence. It's a chase sequence the entire time. The inciting incident of Mad Max Fury Road is that she decides to take a left, drives way in a straight line way into the desert, stops, turns around, and goes back. That's literally what happens in the movie in terms of the journey, and yet it's the best movie ever made. It's instead of driving to Gastown, she decides to go the other way. That's literally it, and I find that so amazing. But so we just hear about all the stuff in Fury Road that then we get to see. We get to spend time in Gastown. We get to spend time in at the Bullet Farm. We get to see the oasis of the green whatever's
The Green Place.
The Green Place. We get to see it. We get to see that it's beautiful and was worth trying to save and all this stuff. And then you get to see the Dementis and his like weird band of like hippies, and find out what a terrible businessman he is.
Was terrible businessman. I don't know if he was a terrible leader though.
I
don't think he's a good leader, right? But he's not a terrible leader. I know you don't want to get too spoilery here, but like
he's charismatic. He's a charismatic leader of a nomadic biker gang that like pillages. He can't be in one place. He gets bored. He doesn't know how to deal with people. He doesn't instill enough respect to like stands in sharp contrast to Immortan Joe, who's literally like all of my soldiers will literally die for me if I ask them to. Watch. And like it's I think it's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition there, and you also get to see like how tough it is to hang on to Gastown, like because interestingly enough, you and I have talked about this offline, and I also wrote a piece about it. I have spent a lot of time playing the Mad Max video game from 2015, the canonicity of which is they were pulling from the same kind of source material of backstory as the comic books were, and that was brought into Furiosa, which is cool. I don't think it's a great game, but I have played it like all the way through 4 times. I looked because after I watched Furiosa, there's so many references to the game. I was like, oh wow. And so I was like, I'm going to play that again and just like make sure that I'm not missing a few things. There were a few things I had missed. But I've put like almost 250 hours into that game.
That's a lot of hours.
It's a lot of hours. And it's, again, it's not like the story's not amazing. The characterizations in that game are not amazing. Like a lot of it is pretty straightforward, and like the fighting is very boring and all this stuff. However, the atmosphere is tremendous, and you get a lot of backstory and lore just from reading stuff and collecting things, which is big these days. But then the bulk of it is you get to build a car that you then get to drive around as fast as you can and crash into other cars and shit. And it's like, that is, what else do you want, really? Like,
as someone who loved Twisted Metal growing up, that's really all I want from a game.
I feel like the problem with it is that it takes a little while to get going, but once you get your car up to the point where like you can actually crash into stuff and actually do damage, Oh, it's such an it because you get to go really fast. You feel the car speed in that game. Um, but Gastown's a place, and it looks exactly like it does in from the game into the movie. Um, there's a character. Do you remember? This is a bit of a spoiler, sort of. Do you remember in Furiosa when she is trying to find a car or some vehicle, and there's the guy at the Citadel who goes, "I built a car."
Yep.
That character is your sidekick character from Mad Max the game. And I was like, is that just a similar character? No, in the credits is the same character name, which is Chum Bucket, which I think might actually be the worst one.
Yeah, that's in the running with Piss Boy.
Yeah.
Although I would definitely, based on their jobs, much rather be Chum Bucket.
Certainly. Yeah. He's a black finger. He builds your car. He fixes it on the fly and all this
He's
stuff.
he's a mechanic.
Yeah.
His
He's
name is
very
not
good.
as telling as the other
No.
guy.
I do like the idea that like, well, we don't waste water on carburetors or not carburetors, radiators of if the car overheats, you pour piss on it, which is like, boy, those cars have to stink. Boy, that world has to stink.
Oh yeah,
But
I
anyway,
mean,
so
it's got to smell so bad though all the time that you just get nose numb.
I'm sure that's true. Not grew up. I went to college at this little town in northern Colorado that is known for two things. There's a lot of very old money in Greeley, Colorado. There is a big meat packing plant and
Okay.
there is a sugar beet factory. And in the morning, you smell cow and sugar beets. And sugar beets, if you don't know what they smell like, they kind of smell like peanut butter a little bit. So every day you smell cow manure, slaughtered animal, and peanut butter. And as the sun rises, that's what you smell. And you get nose numb to that. I was there for 4 years, and like some days are worse than others, and some days you're like, oh geez. But like it was always like, you smell that? It smells like money. So anyway, so I know what I know what you're saying. But and then Scrotus, which is one of Immortan Joe's sons, who's not in Fury Road. He's not in Fury Road because, spoilers, he dies in the video game. Because he's the main bad guy of the video game that you have to kill. It looks different. It looks a little more like Rictus Erectus, but it
Well,
is that character.
I do wish, I don't know how he looks in the video game, but I do wish he looked a little bit more terrifying like he does in the official canonical Fury Road comic books.
Yeah, and I
which
think
are
that
all prequels.
Yeah.
He's if you look him up in those, if you haven't seen those, read those comics before, you can just find a picture. He definitely looks more like the sociopath that he is, versus just like having a strong Neanderthal like brow, which is what he kind of looks like in Furiosa.
Yeah. Yeah, in the video game he looks a lot more like he does in the comic book. So, yeah. Yeah, so I just thought that was like, oh, that is so cool that like this game that didn't get a ton of good reviews, like it has its fans, but it's not like it never penetrated the zeitgeist or anything like that. It is like a direct thing that you can play that and see how sturdy the world is that they had built writing Fury Road, and then the backstory that became Furiosa and all this other ancillary material. I think that stuff is so cool. And they don't make a big deal out of it. It's not like, hey everybody, remember this? It's not that at all. It's just like these characters show up and here's how they show up and here's how this stuff shows up. And like there was at no point was it like, you know, they didn't make a big deal out of the fact that like obviously if you've seen Fury Road, you know that Furiosa is missing an arm. Like it's a big moment in her life obviously, but like they don't go, and here it is, like, you know what I mean? Like
I want to talk about this because I think that this is the best. What I'd have to. Okay, let me say this. I think this is about as good as a reveal for something that you know is coming. It's basically the complete opposite of how Nick Fury lost his eye, right? Which I think is like one of the lamest, biggest letdowns of any sort of like, how did that happen prequel moments.
yeah.
The significance of Furiosa's missing arm and what it means for her story spanning both of these movies is absolutely incredible. It's whatever you might have come up with. I think it exceeds that. It is meaningful. It's not just this thing that kind of happens. It really ties into her story. It explains, why when we meet her in Fury Road, she has, she says in Fury Road, I tried to go home multiple times, right? Like this is something she has attempted and has just not been able to do. I love, this is the advantage of, he wrote these scripts together, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Charlize Theron had the Furiosa script when she was coming to understand the character and who she was. And this is the advantage of long-term planning, right? I mean, like you don't have to go in and fill in the backstory because the backstory fed into the movie you made.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. And I hope that if that's one of the lessons that maybe people take from this, which is maybe some more long-term planning, because we've definitely seen some franchises that have gone off the rails by not having those kinds of ideas.
Or just thinking that, well, now if we're going to make a prequel, we got to make it real winky. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't have to do that stuff.
No, you
Um,
don't. You don't have to make it winky. In fact, stop winking entirely. Just don't do it.
I don't. Yeah, I'm very over winking. Just blink. So yeah. The long and short of it is, if you haven't seen Furiosa and you did like Fury Road, go give it a shot. It's not the same type of movie, but there's enough stuff there that I think is similar that I think you'd like. And also, it's just like it's Chris Hemsworth doing maybe the best acting of his career. Like he's so good in it.
I think if nothing else, Dementis is the most interesting villain, and probably I'm saying that like there's a question. I don't even think it's close because
Mm-mm.
I went back and rewatched after I saw Furious. I went back and watched the three original movies, and there's some really great villains. Some legitimately terrifying, like Toe Cutter in the original. Some just really fun, like Lord Humongous.
Yeah.
Um, but Dementis has a depth to him that I'm not sure any of the other villains do. Because even a Morton Joe, we don't really get his story in Fury Road.
No.
We understand his position in the Citadel. We see his war boys and what they'll do, and this movie reestablishes that again. About how devoted these people are to him and how they view him quite literally as an immortal god among men. But Dementis, and I don't think I'm giving too much away when I say this here. Dementis has more in common with Max than any other character, any other villain in the franchise. He tells Furiosa like, "Yeah, I lost my people. I lost my people," and I kind of went mad too. And where Max took a right and kind of tried to hold on to his humanity, and that kind of defines him. Dementis went left, specifically trying to leave his humanity behind because he
Mm-hmm.
thought that was the only way to survive. They are two sides of the same coin, and with just a little twist, they could very easily switch roles. And it just gives a depth to the character. And Hemsworth's performance is so good because he's doing all of that. He's giving this character that depth. He's kind of this tragic figure that you both hate and feel bad for, but he's also doing it while completely fitting into the ridiculous world of the wasteland, which
Mm.
is, has really kind of been ridiculous for most of it, right? Like even if you go back and watch the original movie, like society's already gone and the people are just kind of living in denial. Like it's really kind of an insane way to live.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously by Road Warrior, you've got a giant guy wearing, barely any leather with a hockey mask, a goalie hockey mask. Like it's
Yeah.
already completely out there and wild. And he just fits into this so perfectly. He's so funny. Would you say this Dementis is probably the funniest character of the five movies?
Oh, yeah, by far.
By
Like
far.
there's a certain point I was just like, is this actually a comedy? You know what I mean? Like, um, the other movies had, especially Fury Road, had funny bits to it. But yeah, and that's what makes him so interesting. It's like he's ridiculous. He is silly. He looks silly. He talks silly. He acts silly. But he is incredibly deep. He's like, it's all kind of for show. And he's being like a bravura kind of like, I'm the biker messiah or whatever, follow me and all this stuff. And then he starts to realize like how, not like up to the job he is, and he's become embittered by that. By, you know, at a certain point, there's a time jump. I mean, there's a lot of time jumps in the movie, but there's a sequence where, and I again won't give anything away, but he has his people do bad things to other people. And instead of watching those sequences, like the torture sequences, he just goes and sits on the hood of his car facing the other direction and just sits there and like kind of stews while, and like like it gets dark while he's doing that. And then eventually he just goes, all right, that's enough. Doesn't even care. He just knows, I'm going to do this for this long until I'm ready to be done with this. It doesn't matter. Like the hurting of the people doesn't matter to him the way it does early in the movie, where you see him kind of enjoy making this group of strangers essentially fight to the death in order to get one seat in his gang or whatever. And like, he enjoys that kind of aspect of playing with people at the beginning. And then by the end, he's just a shell of a person. I think that is so much more interesting than it's less, I guess, I won't say iconic, but it's sort of like Lord Humongous is not a person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Wes, who is the played by Vernon somebody, who's like basically the secondary villain of the Road Warrior, but is like the actual like
Vernon Wells.
Vernon Wells, thank you. The threat, like the direct threat to Mad Max, is more of a person than Humongous, but is still not like a person. He's just a monster. Toe Cutter is a monster, who is not quite on that. And Morton Joe, like, he's sort of more erudite, but he is like the most physically monstrous because he's full of boils and pustules and he can't even breathe on his own and like all this stuff. And then you get Chris Hemsworth, who is just beefy hot Chris Hemsworth with a weird nose and teeth.
The nose plays. I know some
I
people.
think it does.
The nose plays. The nose plays.
Yeah. Well,
and
it
yes,
really
that is
adds
an
to his
Ocean's
character.
13.
It makes him.
If you're out there,
He
Ocean's
tries
13
to,
reference.
What?
It's an Ocean's 13 reference. Just
the nose plays. Thank you.
And it's just in case anyone's listening and wonder if that was an accident. I don't want them to be sitting there wondering.
Well, thanks for grinding the podcast to a halt so we can make sure to flag your joke.
The nose plays.
I'm laughing. Everyone at home, I'm laughing. Or in your car. Actually, this is probably the best one to listen to in your car because we're talking about car movies. But yeah, so let's go through the original trilogy as well, because I think all three movies are so different from each other. Other than the fact that they are all played by, the main character is all played by the same person, who is Mel Gibson, who is a piece of shit. It's fascinating to see the character kind of grow. Like, the first movie, Mad Max, is like just barely. It's like just the beginning of the dystopian gas apocalypse. Like it's just slightly near future. Like George Miller always likes to say that these movies take place 50 years from next Wednesday, which I think is really nice. It's a really nice, because it's always just slightly ahead of where we are now.
It might not feel like 50 years at this point.
Well, depends on where you are. But yeah, like I was really surprised, because, you know, I don't remember when I first saw these movies, but I was an adult, but when I actually finally watched them, that this movie's just a cop movie. Like, he's just a cop. He's like a street. He's like a traffic cop, essentially, who, like, and there are people, you know, people who drive fast cars, and it's just kind of like a car movie, and it's got a lot of crazy stunts in it. But like the actual like meat of the movie is that he is a police officer who runs afoul of this biker gang. Toe Cutter, played by Hugh Keys Byrne, who is maybe one of the best villains of any, you know, like movie like that.
He's so good. Toe Cutter is so good.
Yeah. Decides to get revenge on Max for basically just the guy doing his job. And then Max gets mad about it because why wouldn't he?
It really is just mad as an angry Max, not mad as in crazy. It's actually stunning if you sit and watch these 5 movies in order, how not crazy Max is in the first 3.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it really just translates better to angry Max. It's not until Fury Road where he is more like out of his mind Max.
Yeah. And that's a part in the video game too. Like, you can build up your fury meter basically. And so like,
sure.
while you're fighting, if you get enough like again, it's kind of to gamify that world too much makes it kind of stupid. Um, but so you fight, and then at a certain point, if you hit enough and don't get, like if you block enough, then your fury meter goes crazy, and then you can like grab people and like throw them over your head and stuff like that. It's
Sure, that's how
fairly
it
fun.
works. Yeah.
But you're right. Like he is just angry Max, and he has a very good reason to be angry, and he's actually fairly level headed for most of the movie.
Yeah, it's not till the end that he snaps.
But there's other characters, like there's his buddy Goose.
The goose.
It's a real shame that in every movie where the guy's sidekick is named Goose, they die horribly.
I don't want to talk about that.
There's only two.
I can't. I literally have not watched that scene in Top Gun in like 20 years. I've seen Top Gun. I won't watch that scene.
You know what happens though.
That's why I don't watch it.
Okay. Well, hey,
It's
I'm not
tough.
telling you. I'm not saying you have to watch it. I just
Good.
think you're in denial is all.
I definitely.
But there's the first Mad Max was definitely made in the time of, the early days of Ozploitation, which is what they, if you haven't ever seen, Not Quite Hollywood, which is this really interesting movie about Australian exploitation movies from the 70s and 80s, highly recommended. It's very interesting that like Australian film critics were maybe more snooty than British film critics. And so when they started making these exploitation movies, they were like, what is this filth and garbage and all this stuff? Very interesting. But Mad Max was just kind of one of those type of movies. There were a lot of stunt heavy, either motorcycle or car movies back then. This one had kind of the added benefit of having a more interesting setting, which is the near future, and having like these kind of souped up cars and these weird biker gangs and everything like that. But there's another movie called The Cars That Ate Paris, which is a similar type of thing. And that's where like you get the cars that have the spikes on them and stuff like that, which was made by, I think it was made by Peter Weir. It was not made by George Miller at all. And then there's another movie which came after this, called Dead End Drive-In, where like they just take an old drive-in and that's where the juvenile delinquents get put. And obviously they learn that we're in prison. This is not actually like a fun drive-in. So anyway, it was just one of many, but I think it kind of stood the test of time in terms of like, not least because it had an actor who became like a big star, or who was on the road to becoming a big star, but it also just like, it was kind of a more competently made film than a lot of those movies. And then it was a sufficient enough hit that they, a couple years later, got to make Mad Max 2. And that is the one that blows it wide open. Because by that point, it's not just a story about a cop anymore. It's a fable about this guy who is, he takes down, raiders and gang members on the road, steals their gas, his sawed-off shotgun, and he's got a dog and like all this stuff that is very what we think of when we think of Mad Max, like iconography. It's all from The Road Warrior. And that is kind of the only movie that even has all that stuff. Because he doesn't even get to drive the Interceptor for very much in that movie.
No, barely.
Which is sort of like the inside joke of all these movies, is that the Interceptor barely exists. But it's always the car everybody wants.
As someone who just watched both of those movies days before this podcast, they hold up so well.
Yeah.
There is a grittiness to them that, instead of looking dated, seems kind of timeless. It's very much of a time and place, and yet it feels like it really does feel like, 50 years from now when society collapses, this is what it's, and what stood out to me was just how well made they are. I mean, he's got these incredible sequences on the roads, like cars just chasing down other cars, and you are so close. And then you kind of look, you're like, if you think like Fury Road was sort of this like advanced, like so much of this was like advanced and they couldn't do it before. A lot of Fury Road and Furiosa is there. The DNA is already there in the first movie and in the second movie. And, I actually do think that in some ways Furiosa better encapsulates everything that the franchise has to offer than Fury Road, because Fury Road really, like you said, it's a chase movie. We leave the Citadel and then it ends coming back to the Citadel. We don't really spend a lot of time there. It's all on the road. And that's not even the first Mad Max, which is a lot of cops chasing bad guys on the road, still has a lot of scenes at houses, diners, the remains of a police station, stuff like that. Whereas then Road Warrior is like, oh, here's a kind of a reestablished oil refinery, which obviously plays a big role in Furiosa. Um, it's really remarkable. And I'm not the first person to say this, but it really does seem like with Furiosa, it's a movie he's just been building to for decades. And maybe to reference another movie, it's kind of like Tony Stark's dad leaving him blueprints for something that he can't invent yet. Like, oh, I don't have the technology, but you will. You can do this. Except George Miller just left it for himself.
Yeah.
It's like he's like, all right, listen, when we're in our 70s and 80s, we can do all this stuff. Here's everything you need now, future me. Which is, I don't know. I don't know what someone could say about George Miller and what he's accomplished at any age. But let's face it, like, these are grueling shoots. Grueling shoots. Like you said, that one sequence took 78 days. If you told me I had to work for 78 straight days, I would probably just wither into dust and evaporate.
Yeah.
Like, okay, now you're going to go out into some harsh weather with these big giant machines that are loud and probably, producing so much gas and exhaust it's hard to breathe. Just do that for 78 days. And then you have to film the other 85% of the movie.
Yeah. And you have to have the same amount of energy in all of those scenes as you do in that sequence. And one of the great things about the way George Miller makes films is that he said this throughout the press tour for Furiosa, that like he wants to make movies that are universal regardless of if you understand the words they're saying. Like, you can watch what's going on and everything is communicated visually and through sound, but not dialogue. Like, there's obviously like very throaty V8s and stuff in the movie that are integral to the enjoyment, I think, of this world, because it's all kind of car based. But the
well, you could maybe take out all of the dialogue in Furiosa and follow the story. Like, it could be zero dialogue and just with the score, which I think is amazing. I think is my favorite score of any of these movies. You could take out the dialogue and the story is still there.
Yeah.
Like, it's incredible.
Yeah. And the fact, I mean, they're all sort of, so one of my favorite things about, I don't know if you were the same way. Growing up, I always thought of Westerns as boring dad and grandpa movies. And it was only when I realized, when I started watching the Italian Westerns and how much I enjoyed those. And the reason I enjoy them is because they are not making a movie set in the American West. They are making a movie about watching American Westerns. And so you're watching basically like a fable told through different points of view and different things like that. And to me, like, these movies, even though they are made by one person and from one country and everything like that, they are just sort of that, they embody that same kind of, like, what you're seeing is not what you're seeing. Literally, it is a myth about society breaking down. It's a myth about, heroes kind of popping up. Like, it could be like, medieval stuff. It's that kind of like,
it's more like it's more like it follows an oral tradition of storytelling, a cultural oral tradition. It's great. It actually, I know people, and not like I'm not guilty of this with some franchises. People want to break down timelines to the exact minute and say, oh, this doesn't follow. No, if you're watching these movies and being like, oh, the timeline doesn't make sense, you're not understanding what you're watching in the first place. Because it doesn't make sense, because this is not a coherent story in that sense. These are people telling myths of a man named Max, which is why, I mean, if we really want to look at the timeline, there's no way we've been watching the same Max. It most likely, even in the first three movies, the Mel Gibson version is probably not the same Max. And they even, I think maybe in the second one, they don't even use his name. I'd have to check that, but I remember.
No, I think they just call him the Road Warrior. Yeah.
It stood out to me, and I'm like, I wonder if this is even the same person.
Yeah,
because I'm not sure it is, and it does, and it makes it better, because these are as to quote Dementis, they make it epic. These are epic stories, so it works that way, and it could be fun to talk about how maybe that makes sense, and how is there a new Max, But in terms of appreciating them, you don't have to do that. I think
Well,
actually the more you get into it, the more you take away from it.
it's the same type of thing. Like when I was just mentioning spaghetti westerns, like the Man with No Name trilogy. He has a name in all three movies. They're not the same. It's literally he is um the look and kind of the representation of what this mythical kind of character is. They don't make sense in the timeline because the third movie would canonically take place before the other two movies, even though, but in every single one, he's just looking for money and like all this stuff. And it's just like, it's not about the actual like nuts and bolts of when and how and why and all this stuff. Max is, especially after the first movie, let's just, take out the first movie, which kind of just set up the ideas. The Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, and Fury Road are all people telling stories about this mythical figure. And then even in Furiosa, there's a character who I really like, who is the, I guess, what is his name in that? Oh, shoot.
The
I can look it
History
up.
Man?
The History Man. Thank you. Who is literally, he has the history of the world or whatever tattooed on his body. And he goes out there and tells people, and this was the story of how Furiosa did the end. It's like, we don't even get a clear ending in that movie, again, spoilers, for what happened. It's like, well, some people say it's this and some people say it's this. And it's just like, yeah, because like it is all just sort of this mythical, fable. And like, we know that, seeing where other, seeing that there are stories to tell that don't directly involve Max Rockatansky or whoever he is, because there was that whole thing going around after Fury Road that like, oh, what if this Mad Max is actually the feral kid from Road Warrior? And it's like, that's so much less interesting to me than it's just, these are just other stories about this character. This, if we really looked at, and not, I was going to say Sherlock Holmes, but there's the canon of Sherlock Holmes, but some of those like pulp characters who have like 7,000 novels written about them. James Bond, I guess, let's say James Bond, like putting James Bond in an actual timeline of events is not as interesting as just, here's just another adventure of this hero who has these particular traits and does these particular things. Like as kind of high concept, weirdly, as it was for the Daniel Craig movies to be the definitive story of this version of the character, I think it kind of sells the myth of James Bond short. And I think we're running out of ideas. Even friggin' Marvel and and DC movies, superhero movies should be all myth, and they're not. They're so, well, how many years has it been since Iron Man 1? It's like, who gives a flying boomerang? I didn't want to say a swear word.
It's easy that again, it could be fun and there's sometimes stuff to be gained, but you can go so far that you lose the forest from the trees,
Mm-hmm.
like, and the whole point of this is that you're not supposed to worry about any of that. You're supposed to just experience the forest. You're not supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be, so yeah, we're in total agreement on this. And I think again, talking about how the first three movies, and we haven't got to Beyond Thunderdome yet, but those three movies, it really feels like Furiosa is more like the what he was building towards in Fury Road,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of taking aspects from all of these pieces that he's laid. It's this puzzle, and he gives her the kind of story that he's never really even given Max, right? Because in Max, we just kind of learn about like what happened to make Max this way in the first place. Then we
Mm-hmm.
see this brief moment in his life, or at least whoever these people think he is. And then same thing in Beyond Thunderdome, whereas we get 15 years of her life. We get from when her life is stolen to when she starts to reclaim it. And it takes from all of these things, because we get to go in this movie, we get to really go to the Bullet Farm. We get to go to Gastown, which are these really important places because these are where civilization in its new twisted form is at least taken hold, right? There are people who can live there. There's somebody in charge. They might be terrible, but it's not complete anarchy like it is
Mm-hmm.
out on the road, which we see. Max is out there and he gets taken by the war boys, versus the war boys who have a place to live and they have community and they have friends and they have something to believe in. As bad as it is, it's still something. Um, it, I actually think going back and watching the original trilogy after Furiosa made me like Furiosa even more. And it made me appreciate Miller anymore.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, because he is building on across all this stuff. You could even say that like in Beyond Thunderdome, which I think you and I both agree is maybe the weakest of all of the movies.
Oh, I'm gonna come in a lot hotter than that on Beyond Thunderdome.
um, and there was a lot of stuff going on with George Miller behind the scenes, like his longtime um partner, his producing partner had passed away, and he like partway through production or something like that. So he kind of ceded half of the directing duties to somebody else. And it just kind of it's much less like straightforward a movie. Like the first half is entirely about Thunderdome, about being in Bartertown with Auntie Entity, which is Tina Turner, she's so good in that movie. And like he has to fight for his life and all this stuff, and then like he goes out, and then there's this whole weird thing about these kids who live in the green place again, but like Bartertown is like a precursor to Gastown and the Bullet Farm and the Citadel, and the green place obviously has antecedents and everything like that, and this idea that like Mad Max ultimately saves people, like it seems like he doesn't care for anybody but himself, but is constantly getting involved with helping the little guy or whatever, literally in the case of Thunderdome. I don't think there is, but there's so much about the second half of Mad Max that just doesn't work, or about Beyond Thunderdome that just doesn't work. There's also not really any cars. Like I think that's a huge part that he was trying to maybe like, well, let's try something else. We need the cars. Mad Max is cars.
The first half of Beyond Thunderdome, the Thunderdome part, it would be really good if they eliminated all the saxophone parts. It's got that horrible opening credit song that just sounds like the cheesiest 80s song. It has no place in this universe. It has no place in the wasteland. It immediately makes it feel dorky. It's not cool. It's not gritty. It's a completely different vibe in the worst way from the first two films. If you and by the way, the entire movie, the score is horrendous. It's as bad a score as you will ever hear for any movie. The saxophone parts just specifically ruin the beginning. But what really, really makes Beyond Thunderdome, I don't just think the weakest, I just think it's a straight up bad movie, is that somehow Mad Max makes his way into a Goonies movie where all the Goonies speak like Jar Jar Binks. It is almost unwatchable when he gets to it's Planet Earth. That's what the kids call their oasis, Planet Earth. It is as annoying as a movie can possibly get, and it's really too bad because the whole idea of Bartertown and the power struggles, which by the way, Furiosa plays
Mm-hmm.
off again, right? Completely takes that from Beyond Thunderdome, the playoff between Auntie and Master Blaster. There's just some great ideas in the first half of that movie, and then the second half is just the score literally sounds like you're watching like an Indiana Jones movie or an Amblin film, and it's just like, what are we doing? Like, we are in a place called the Wasteland, and we've just watched we just watched this guy like fight off a biker horde, where in a movie where a little kid kills someone with a boomerang knife.
Yeah.
Like what's this? And this movie also, I know he loves to recast people in these movies, and it really works in Furiosa, where I always forget his name. Hold on, I gotta look it up. Who plays Scrotus? Josh Hellman, who was Slit in Fury
Mm-hmm.
Road. So it totally works. It's a totally different character. I didn't even realize it was him till I saw the end credits. But somehow he thought it was a good idea to recast what's his name?
You talk about Bruce Spence.
Yes, it's not just that he recast Bruce Spence, who has one of the most unique, recognizable faces in movie history.
Yeah.
He recast him to play a different guy who flies a plane.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, wait, what? I thought he was the leader of why is he, does he know him? Like the fact that nobody was like, this is, you got to put like a beard on him or something. Give him a wig, some goggles that, I don't know, hide his face. It is, I think there's a real conversation after Furiosa that we can talk about. Where does Mad Max rank in the all-time best movie franchises?
Mm-hmm.
Because even though the modern era films are so, in terms of visuals and scope, so different from the original three films, in kind of the same way, and this is another franchise we've done a podcast on, in kind of the same way, like all the Mission Impossibles, starting with 4, feel like a totally different franchise than the first 3 movies. Um, I think Mad Max is in the discussion for the best franchise ever, but you do have to kind of acknowledge that there is just this complete terrible, just mind-numbing dud in the middle, and that is Beyond Thunderdome.
Yeah, and you can't escape the sort of like the problem, luxury problem, but I think it ended up being a problem, is that nobody expected Mad Max 2 to be such a big worldwide hit and to be so kind of like influential on just kind of pop culture. You know, the idea of the post-apocalypse with leather clad, half leather, half skin, bikers and people driving cars. That is all from, and like, football pads with spikes on them and stuff like that. Anytime you see that in a movie, that's Mad Max. Like anytime anybody references that is, there was nowhere before that.
One of the greatest tag teams in pro wrestling history. Literally the Road Warriors walking around with football pads with spikes on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all that. That's all Mad Max.
So that came out in 81 in Australia, I believe, and then 82 over here, or maybe 82 and 83, something like that. But so you had all of this success. And then by that point, you also had, hey, we can get a little more money for this. I mean, it is a bigger movie. Beyond Thunderdome is a much bigger looking movie. They can do more stuff. They got Tina Turner to be in it. Like she even included an original song, I believe.
I think that's the one that plays during the opening credits. I'm not. Someone could check me on that, but
it might be.
Whatever it is. If it is, it's bad for this movie. It's bad for this movie.
It's bad for this movie. And then I think that, like, this one was PG-13. This is the one that is not R-rated. And like, I think the kind of the frenetic and kind of gruesome, or at least bone crunching kind of violence is part and parcel to what people like about these movies. And it's just kind of a soft movie overall, even though you have that beginning where like the battle between Max and the Blaster is really not a fun thing to watch. And yet then you get to this whole thing with these kids who can't talk, and like the captain, or Bruce Spence's character's son is the most annoying character I think in movie history.
Well, at least he doesn't speak like the Planet Earth kids.
That's true.
That much. At least we remember. You said Captain Walker.
Oh yeah, it's such a. I'll be honest, I didn't rewatch that one for this. I kind of was like, I'm good. I don't need to see it. But I think there was sort of like, it's again, like sort of a Poison Chalice type of situation, I think. And I also think Miller was trying to just kind of branch out. What did he make after this? Like he made Witches of Eastwick, which I think was just him directing, which is a pretty funny movie. But he went on to make Babe and Happy Feet, and like he contains multitudes. So like I think there is more to him. But I think like by the time he got to make Fury Road, there was so much buildup that he got to make this kind of maximalist, like operatic action film that is just all energy. Like it never lets up. Like it is almost an exhausting film to watch, because I forget if I told this story on the podcast or not, but the first time I saw Fury Road was in the theater, and I had flown back from London that day.
I remember this.
Yeah.
we've been working together a long time.
Yeah. I flew back from London that day, and I think I landed at like 3 p.m. or something like that. And it's like, or something, whatever. And I was just like, well, I obviously cannot go to sleep yet because I'm going to be jet lag city. So I need to try to stay up. Well, let me go see this Mad Max movie. Even if I fall asleep in the theater, at least I think it started at like 7:30 or something like that. And so I'm just like completely delirious watching this, just like, and I'm just going like, oh my God, what is this thing? And the beginning of that movie is wild. Like it's just so fast, and like stuff coming out, and Mad Max having these weird visions and everything like that. And just like, it just doesn't let up. And like, I had to like check with the people that I was there with, cause it was packed. Like it wasn't a particularly huge theater in North Hollywood, but, it was full. And, I was just like checking with other people, like that was as good as I thought it was. Right. And they were like, oh yeah, that was so good. And I was just like, okay, good. Cause I was like, did I just dream that this is a great movie or what? But like when you watch that and then go back and watch even the Road Warrior, I think the worst thing about Fury Road is that it makes the Road Warrior seem kind of boring because it's so slow compared to Fury Road. Like it's still got a lot of great stuff, but even the car chases, the pace is still kind of a little bit leisurely. Um,
I think if you go back, the end, it get towards the end, it does pick up. I remember thinking like this is another really impressive chase by him, but at the end, because there's not a lot like before that, it's mostly at the oil refinery.
yeah, and there's some good stuff. I mean, there's some really fun bits in that, but and then I think that's really the problem with Fury Road is that it's too good. Like it's which is stupid. Too
No,
stupid
no,
to say
no,
that's a
no, no.
problem.
I'm
But
glad you
like,
said that because while I was watching Furiosa and when I came out, I did think to myself, what if he had reversed the order of these movies?
yeah.
What if he had made Furiosa and then made Fury Road? How would we feel about both of them? And it's look, it's easy to say that because maybe Furiosa, maybe he's making a Mad Max movie without Max at all. Maybe it sinks it entirely from the get go.
Right.
Because I mean, Fury Road did need to rely on these people who had grown up with Mad Max movies a little bit, right? I mean,
Hmm.
at least some like, that was drawing on people who had, I these movies used to be on TV all the time when I was a kid, all the time.
Hmm.
And I'm a little too young to have been those people who saw them, but I'm old enough that they were constantly on TV. But I did think like in a world where we could be guaranteed to get both of these movies, what if Furiosa had come out first? Would that have been better? And I think that there is an argument that it would have been, but I think ultimately what will happen is these movies, we've lived with Fury Road for a long time now. And we've been able to talk about it, read about it, think about it, rewatch it. Furiosa just came out. Well, 5 years from now, it's not going to feel any different,
Hmm.
right? Like we'll know Fury Road came out first, but when you watch them, it's gonna feel like they coexist at the same time.
Hmm.
So it won't matter. But I did think about that, like because there were, I mean, obviously we know she lives, right?
Hmm.
And we know kind of where she's going, and we know a little bit from the comic books if you've read them or went to a site like ours and read the piece we did about it. Um, but there were moments where I was like, I kind of wish I didn't know she was going to survive right here. It doesn't take away from the movie. It doesn't, but it would have been a different experience without any of that foreknowledge.
I definitely think so because like once it gets to the point where like, oh hey, there's a Morton Joe, and oh hey, the people, like you just start to do that, um, and then like since you know where it's going, it does in a lot of ways. You could go, well, this takes away a lot of um the tension, I guess, or whatever. But it's again, it's not about this huge giant epic action sequence or action story of whatever. That movie Fury Road is like a day and a night or whatever, 2 days and 2 nights, something like that. Um, and Furiosa, as you said, is 15 years, and so it's literally just learn. It's something different that we haven't seen in this thing before, which is that we see how the wasteland progressed and we see how all this stuff kind of happened and that there are huge swaths of the wasteland that we had not seen before because it's a huge, the deserts, the middle part of Australia is huge and it's all a desert and nobody knows where they're going. It's like it's very deadly out there. But the coasts were that I mean that is kind of where most of the people live is because it's more habitable. So it's really interesting to kind of see, the fact that like when in Furiosa, when the biker gang comes across a war boy, they don't even know what that is or who they represent. And he's just kind of like, take me to your leader, essentially. And he thinks he can just stroll up and like talk smack to Morton Joe. And it's like, we know that that's not something you can do, but he doesn't. And that's the kind of stuff that makes Furiosa interesting. It's I would love to see like a full like just like a map of like where does he think all this stuff is in relation to like where was stuff from the earlier movies, like where was the oil refinery from Fury Road, did that become or from the Road Warrior, did that become
I was thinking about.
Gastown or
I
is that
thought about
somebody
that a lot.
else?
I thought about that a lot
Yeah.
too. Not, and again, not in the I need answers,
No, I'm
just
just
in the way
curious.
that you
Yeah.
kind of think about how different cultures come up with similar stories. Like
Hmm.
are we? Is this? is this oil refinery from Road Warrior the same one that we see in Furiosa? And like it's just interesting in thinking of in that kind of old traditional storytelling.
Mhm.
It's more rewarding not knowing. It doesn't mean you can't think about it. Like it's fun to think about it. If he suddenly came out and was like, oh yes, it's exactly the same, I'd be like, okay, all right, so much for the fun.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is, I mean, again, I think you and I both agree that Fury Road is maybe top 10 best movies ever made. Like it's, I don't know, that might be a bit harsh, but it's, or not harsh, uh, overstating it, but it deserves to be in the conversation, I think. But one of the best things about it is that it sets up so quickly without telling you, and here is how the world works in the current way of things. We know that the three biggest things that are the most important to the people in the wasteland are water, gasoline, and bullets.
Yep.
So it's like, we need to live, we need to drive, we need to kill. That's the three things you must do in the wasteland. And whoever's in charge of those three, and water is the citadel. It's not just like, wetland or something like that. It's made myself laugh. It
Classic
is literally,
cardigan.
yeah, he's always doing that. Oh, whiskey Pete. That was my name in college. It wasn't. It's a church. Like it's basically like people are devoted to worshiping water because it is literally the one of the three things that is life. And then Gastown is this horrible, like, it's full of oil and it's just kind of a grody place. And then the bullet farm is very militaristic, as you would expect. And the bullet farmer is this guy who literally dresses in a like an armor made of bandoliers, basically. Like it's really fascinating. Um, and even at the time, I was always like, why is the people eater, that's the character without a nose who like fondles himself all the time, like, how did he get in charge of Gastown? That doesn't really seem like. And then it's like, oh, he wasn't initially. And that's the best part of that stuff, is you get to learn kind of like, here's how this world actually works. And you find out the one that's hardest to hold on to is Gastown.
Well, because it didn't seem horrible to live there.
Yeah, it's awful. It's the
Oh my
worst place.
God.
Nobody wants to live there.
Like literally living in an oil refinery. Like it seems so awful. Really made the desert seem almost appealing.
I know, because at least there's the off chance that you can find, like, I don't know, trees or something.
Fresh air.
Fresh air, yeah. Oh, it's
As
so
fresh as it could be in a
gross. And that's the other,
wasteland.
like, in the game too. Gastown is the smallest area of the game that you can get to, but once you get there, like, the sky is black. Like, even during the day, you can hardly tell because, like, yeah. There's a couple things in the game that I do want to mention before we get into the list of ripoffs, because I think that's really interesting. But so, especially replaying it for this last time, there is some stuff about that game that they put in specifically because it's in Fury Road that I think is very stupid, and it makes me annoyed. One of them is that, so the game has a day-night cycle. So, like, it's not a full 24 hours, obviously, but like, the more you do stuff, the day kind of progresses, and then it gets to be nighttime. Some stuff you can only do at night. Like, it's a typical kind of open world thing. Random times throughout the thing, could be day, could be night, whatever, you will get an alert that says a storm is coming. And you have to try to drive to outrun the storm. You have to get back to one of your bases. Like, you take out bases, bad guy bases, and then they're yours. So you have to make it to one of those before the storm hits. And if you can't, like, if you're in the middle of a mission or something like that and you cannot get out, you have to just stand there for real time 10 minutes.
Ugh.
And if you're driving in the middle of it, because it's like, it's like in Fury Road, like the big, huge dust storm, stuff blows at you and you can get killed or picked up and taken, like, in your car can get flipped over and like all this stuff. And it's just like, this is so irritating. I would love a version of this where I could just turn that off, because all I want to do is just kind of go through the game. Like, there's nothing fun about that.
It's a real time.
It's, and you just have to stand there and it's like, you have to stand somewhere where stuff can't hit you, because you will get hit with stuff. And even if you're in your car, it doesn't mean, like, something can hit it and your car will explode. And it's just like, ugh. It's a real pain in the butt. The other thing that I hate about it is that um, because there's something so Max has these weird visions and stuff like that. In the game, you have to, in order to upgrade yourself, not your car or your gear, but your your legend, they call it. So it's like how much how much health do you get from water, how much health do you get from food, like all this stuff. You have to like go find this guy who's randomly throughout the thing, and then you have to go talk to him. And there's always a cutscene that ends in it's like blowing stuff in your face, like a hallucinogen, and then you can put in your points. But that takes forever. And then the last thing is that it's so like pretentious throughout. As you're just going around doing your stuff, you can find these things that are called history relics, which are literally just pictures, like postcards or photos. And often on the back, there will be something scrawled. And you have to listen to Mad Max say something about them. And they almost never have anything to do with the specific picture that you're looking at. It's always just like, we thought we had time. We were wrong. And it's just like, oh, this is so dumb. Like, especially on the fourth playthrough, I'm just like, I wish I could turn all this stuff off. But the storm is the number one thing. I'm just like, oh, you get all the way to where you need to go and you're going to start like sieging this base. And then you have to get back in your car and drive all the way back. It's such a pain.
So when you said you've spent 250 hours playing this game, what was about 17 of them was just waiting out storms? 17 hours?
It sure seemed like it. On this last playthrough, I like made it. I was like, oh, fine. So I drove back to a base. It says, you outran the storm. Great. And then I went and did something. And then as soon as I got back in my car, it said a storm was coming. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I don't want to do this again.
Well, listen, it's I imagine in a dystopian wasteland, there's probably not great forecasts. It's very last minute.
But if you make it to your base, the storm just stops. And then you can immediately go back out. It's like, it's not realistic. So why did they do it? Anyway. And if anybody out there has played the Mad Max video game and wants to complain about some stuff, write to us at laserfocus@nerdist.com. Okay, so I want to go through some of these. I found a list of Mad Max ripoffs on IMDb.
I got it. I got the same one.
55 titles is what this one says.
Feels incomplete though, because
it has to be.
In fairness, this says ripoffs, but there are hundreds more that are clearly pulling from Mad Max.
Yeah, these ones are the ones that are the direct ripoffs of Mad Max. But then some of them, it's like Terminator Salvation. I wouldn't call that a ripoff of Mad Max. Anyway, so I'm going to see how many of these I've seen. So one of them is called Wheels of Fire, which I've never even heard of. The second one I've heard of a bunch of times. It's called Steel Dawn from 1987.
I think it's another movie that was on all the time. Yeah, I think this. I have friends who really like this movie, or at least fond of it in the way that people are. But I think that this was also one of those movies that was on all the time as a kid, and I feel like I watched it without ever actually watching it.
This one decided to have swords and spears and stuff as weapons instead of guns, but they still had cars. Very strange. Then we get a fair amount of Italian ones. Well, Waterworld is one, which I don't know if I 100% agree with.
I think Waterworld is definitely a Mad Max ripoff. It's Mad Max on water. They got the roving. They got the roving, like the roaming horde, right? Except they got jet skis instead. You've got people out there just desperately surviving on their own little vehicle, except they're boats instead of cars. You've got the I forget what the big place is called that they take over, and the floating city and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a green place, like where people are desperate to get to. I think Waterworld stood out to me. Like, I don't think I necessarily thought of it before, but just as soon as I saw on this list, I'm like, oh yeah, it's Mad Max on the water.
Yeah, I think initially I was like, I don't know about that, but you're right. It wouldn't have existed. And you're right. People did say, oh, it's Mad Max on the water, because that's the way they had to say it. There's this one called Battle Truck, aka Warlords of the 21st Century, which I want to say was on Mystery Science Theater. I could be wrong about that. After the oil wars came a greater threat, and it's just Mad Max again. It's that was from 82. That one could not have been closer to the release of the Road Warrior. And I feel like they probably somebody saw Mad Max 2 when it was released in Australia and went, we need to make this movie before it comes out over here. This is big, huge truck. Um, there's I'm gonna skip some of the ones that are from like more recent years. Like Road Wars literally was made in 2015, which I'm sure was just an asylum movie that was meant to rip off Fury Road. But there's some Italian ones. Warriors of the Wasteland, which was made by Enzo G. Castellari, who made the original Inglorious Bastards, or original movie called Inglorious Bastards. Which is the third part actually in a very weird trilogy that not only rips off Mad Max and that type of stuff, but also Escape from New York and The Warriors. So the first one is called 1990: The Bronx Warriors. And it's just a gang movie in post-apocalypse instead of just regular New York. And then the second one is called Escape from the Bronx, aka Escape 2000, which definitely was on Mystery Science Theater. And then this third one is like, let's just actually just go out and drive around. Exterminators of the Year 3000 is another Italian one that I saw, which is just a straight up ripoff. This one I saw was American, but I think was made with Italian money, called Metal Storm: The Destruction of Jared Sin, which is very stupid title. It had somebody from the Road Warrior in it. Do you want to guess who from the Road Warrior is in it?
Wes?
No.
The feral kid?
You know, the kind of blondie, white-haired guy who just kind of runs the town?
Yeah.
The refinery?
Yeah. I kind of think he's the worst part of that movie.
Yeah. They got him to Papagallo is the character's name.
Yeah.
The Road Warrior.
That's a dirty little secret about the Road Warrior, by the way. There's some not great performances in that movie.
Yeah. But he was the one they could get, and he's the bad guy, Jared Sin. And it is a 3D movie. Hella looks 3D. 1980s 3D. 2019, After the Fall of New York, made by a favorite filmmaker of mine, Sergio Martino, which is again not a very good movie, but it's enjoyable enough. It's another like Escape from New York meets Mad Max type of movie. The aforementioned Dead End Drive-In, which it was 86, which is later than I thought it was. So I guess it kind of technically was dystopian future Australia, but it's a teen movie. It's like, what if teens were all caught in this concentration camp and they had to try to escape, but it was a drive-in because it's teens. It's an interesting movie. Then a favorite of a friend of the show, Adam Murray, Hell Comes to Frogtown, starring Rowdy Roddy Piper. After a worldwide nuclear war where 68% of the male population was wiped out and virile men become a rarity, Sam Hell, a scavenger and a highly virile man, is assigned to help rescue a group of fertile women kidnapped by humanoid frogs.
Kyle, I'm not saying we need to end the podcast on that note, but I don't know if this list is going to get better than Hell Comes to Frogtown starring Roddy Piper.
I doubt it will.
I mean, the funny thing is, there are a lot of movies that people are going to be like, what? Are you making these titles up? And then all of a sudden you get to 19 and 20 and it's Terminator Salvation in Oblivion with Tom Cruise. This is a weird... Just look it up. List. Mad Max ripoffs on IMDb. Some of these could not be more blatant in how much they ripped off Mad Max. And some of these are like, who put this list together?
Yeah. And some of them, I think they just kind of saw the poster. Like Atlantis Interceptors is not a Mad Max ripoff. It's about people like... It's like Rambo meets Indiana Jones because they like find relics of the lost city of Atlantis. That's not a Mad Max ripoff.
Yeah, I mean, and these are supposed ripoffs, whereas there are many movies that are clearly inspired by Mad Max that you wouldn't call a ripoff. You know, like I would think maybe The Book of Eli, right? Wouldn't you say that's
for sure? I think that was one that George Miller kind of cited as like, okay, I need to make a Mad Max movie again because he's like Book of Eli. There are a couple more recent ones that I think are really well done that are again inspired by Mad Max, doing kind of similar Mad Max things. One of them from 2008 is Neil Marshall's Doomsday. I don't know if you ever saw this one.
No.
It's kind of Escape from New York and also Apocalypse Now, but also The Road Warrior. Where these kind of mercenaries have to go into this, war-torn city to try to track down this, like, I don't even know, like a warlord or something like that. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. So that's the whole first part, is it's like in horrible, disgusting dystopian city. And then they have to go further into Scotland to try to get Malcolm McDowell, who has put himself as like the ruler of this old medieval style society that he's reconnected. And it ends with this big giant car chase through the Highlands, I guess, of Scotland. It's very fun. It's not an amazing movie, but it's a lot of fun. And then the other one is Turbo Kid, which is a low budget Canadian movie from 2015, which is basically a post-apocalyptic, like, it's set in 1997, the post-apocalypse of 1997.
I remember 1997 very differently.
Me too. Well, you know what else takes place in 1997? Escape from New York. It just sounded futuristic in the early 80s. A comic book fan adopts the persona of his favorite hero to save his enthusiastic friend and fight a tyrannical warlord. Michael Ironside is the bad guy in that, and I would highly recommend watching Turbo Kid.
Michael Ironside is a much better name than Turbo Kid.
You know Michael Ironside. Don't pretend you don't know Michael Ironside.
I mean, some of these movies, it's just some of the worst titles you will ever hear in your life. I mean,
I didn't love these movies, but there's a pair of Australian movies that were made before and after Fury Road. Wormwood, Road of the Dead, and Wormwood Apocalypse, which are sort of, it's Mad Max with zombies.
Road of the Dead is such a great title on its own.
Yeah.
Get rid of the wormwood.
Yeah, I think it maybe is related to a comic book, but I don't actually remember.
I mean, look, ready? The Scorched Earth, 2020 Texas Gladiators, Endgame, Bronx, Lotta Finale, Cherry 2000. I mean, what are we doing here? It's like, is anybody spending any time titling these movies?
The Exterminator and The Exterminator 2, both starring Robert Ginty.
A Man Called Rage.
It's a pretty good name. That's another Italian one.
It's like the 7th best title on this list. Megaforce.
Hands of Steel, which is literally about a guy with steel hands. A Cyborg, another Sergio Martino movie. Raiders of the Sun. She, which is a remake of I think it's like an old 30s movie, but about like a jungle society that a woman is in charge of. Oh, heaven forbid. But I think then they set it in the post-apocalypse. Rats Night of Terror, directed by Bruno Mattei and Claudio Fragasso, which is an infamously terrible movie where the streets are overrun by giant rats. Of course, why wouldn't they be? Toad Warrior, which I believe is the sequel to Hell Comes to Frogtown, starring Sam Hell's son, Max Hell. Lucio Fulci's the Warriors of the Year 2072, I think is what it's called, which I actually like. But that one is sort of Mad Max meets The Running Man because it's all on TV. Anyway, these movies are fun. AKA New Gladiators is the other name for that one. But I love kind of crappy Italian ripoffs. So please, if you want to check out some of these and see if there's any other ones before we wrap up. Chain Reaction. I've only just heard about Chain Reaction recently, but I can't imagine it's particularly good. Anyway, have you seen any of those movies besides the 3 ones that are obviously made recently?
No, this is not really like, it's not really as a, it's a lot of these things I think you just kind of have to get that bug early, and this are just not the type of movies I got. And I don't like you and your Italian movies. You're every time I come on, you teaching me something new about them. I mean, talk about a blind spot, but like, I definitely like dystopian movies, although my tolerance for them is getting a little less as the actual world gets more and more like that.
I 100% agree. And
that's actually also why I've kind of had an issue with some horror movies where people really suffer. So, but yeah, I mean, I totally up for action dystopian movie, especially if they have a fun element to them. But no, I can't say I've spent too much time with these Mad Max ripoffs.
I mean, they were very of the time. Most of the ones that I mentioned are from the 80s, and because Italy at the time, so they're I mean, I would go into this if you want, but the Italian film industry eventually just became We need to capitalize. We need to literally exploit what is popular. And so that's why there was a million spaghetti westerns. And then once giallo, or Italian murder mysteries, kind of became a thing, and they became really popular outside of Italy from people like Dario Argento. They made a million of those. They made a million zombie movies. They made a million. They just, like, whatever was popular outside and were sort of easy to make. Like there's like the high grade Italian versions of stuff. Like I think, some of the filmmakers that I mentioned, but like Sergio Martino made arguably 5 of the best giallo movies ever. And he made some of the best like police cop movies. There were a lot of like Dirty Harry kind of antecedents and Bullet, and there was a lot of those kind of things. He made a lot of those, but the 2 that are on this list from him are pretty bad. 2019 After the Fall of New York is not very good, and then Hands of Steel I think is extra bad. But it was just sort of like he had to make these movies. Like this is how you get movies funded, and this is how movies get make any money at all. And then by the 90s, the Italian film industry was effectively dead, as a global concern. So it's really interesting to watch all that stuff, because if there is something popular in the genre space in America or in Britain, you can bet that there are like 5 to 12 Italian movies made by people you have heard of. And I think and they would always get like either has been Americans, or like American actors who kind of looked like stars of the day. Literally there was a guy who was in a bunch of spaghetti westerns named something Southwood. That was his actual name, but I think they just hired him because his name kind of sounded like Eastwood.
Well, I mean, this is what Once Upon a Time in Hollywood plays off of, right? Which is the Italian director goes and gets Rick Dalton to come over and recreate these westerns and make all this money and make these films that aren't going to win awards but are going to be very popular. Oh, I will say this: I've not seen these movies, and it's not a ripoff because they were being made at the same time halfway across the world, independent of each other. But The Warriors is one of my favorite movies.
Warriors is excellent. Warriors is truly great.
Spiritually in the same, kind of circle of those movies. I love that.
Yeah. The trifecta of post-apocalypse: The Warriors, Escape from New York, Mad Max. And that is what so many Italian movies are based on.
I mean, if you're gonna pick 3 movies, those are 3 good ones.
Yep. All right. Well, I think
got a couple of last things for you. Ready?
Okay, great.
I'll go fast. Ready?
Here we go. Last things.
Opening sequence with the actual taking of Furiosa, which everyone knows is coming, so I'm not spoiling anything. And her mother chasing her down. We already know about the mom from the movie, but not only is it absolutely amazing, heart pounding, just an incredible opening. It looks gorgeous. It's so well done, and it's so intense. We were talking about like there's definitely a tension missing from the fact that we know certain things, right? And who survives and whatnot. But it doesn't mean it's not interesting and that you're not still invested. And this is the case, because even if you know a character is not going to make it, the how they don't make it matters, right? And you care about them and you want to see, like, is it heroic? Is it painful? What does it do to Furiosa? How do these losses impact her? And the movie works. I think I've watched Fury Road so often that I do find it quite emotional, because once you can kind of get past the excitement of what you're seeing, you can see the depth of the story and what's happening to these people. That's more prominent in Furiosa on a first viewing than it is in Fury Road. So it is a different experience. It's still meaningful. It's just meaningful in a different way. Second, I know I came and buried Beyond Thunderdome, but I will defend that in this way, and why you can actually cite it as why Mad Max is arguably the best franchise ever. What aspect of this franchise has had the cultural impact as the Thunderdome has? Everybody knows, right? And if two characters or 2 real human beings are going to fight, you're going to get someone referencing Thunderdome, right?
2 men enter, 1 man leave.
Right? It's something people it's like, oh, if something happened, oh, it turned into Thunderdome. I think out of all the 5 movies, that has had the biggest like breakthrough in terms of how we use it, how we reference it. And that's pretty impressive considering it's the only bad movie. And then finally, George Miller addressed this before the movie came out, and I know why he did it. He talked about how Anya Taylor-Joy only has about 30 lines of dialogue in the movie. I think that he was trying to get ahead of this because of what happened with strangely enough, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where there were complaints about Margot Robbie not talking about a lot, even though that totally missed the point of her character and how that movie treated her. Considering she was playing a real person who was brutally murdered. But go back and watch Road Warrior, and Mel Gibson talks half as much in that movie as she does in this one. This is something he has been using for a very long time. He talks about how these are throwbacks to the silent era, to Alfred Hitchcock, where it's a visual medium, and he doesn't want the dialogue to get in the way. The dialogue serves its purpose, but he wants the story to be told through visuals. This is something he has been doing since the very beginning. There's more dialogue, and there are more scenes that look like out of a normal movie in the original, but even then it has long stretches. It's just all visual, and it's great. And I really hope nobody's complaining that she doesn't talk enough. I mean, if you walk out of this movie and don't think that this is her movie, even though it takes a little bit longer to get to her in this movie than you might expect, and she's a powerhouse. I feel maybe we probably did disservice here not talking about just how good she is. We talk about Chris Hemsworth and how much he can convey, even just sitting there silently lost in his own thoughts. She's great. She is rage and sadness and determination and everything all just bottled up. And I think it's an incredible performance to put up against Charlize Theron. They are in harmony. They really are in harmony. Those two performances, these two really talented actresses, really seem to understand the same things about the character, even though they're playing them at different points in their life. Let's put it this way: if you watch Furiosa and then go into Fury Road, you're going to feel like you're watching the same character, even though it is somebody different playing her.
Yeah, and you can tell, and it's sort of nebulous about how much time passes between the end of Furiosa and the beginning of Fury Road. They kind of try to bridge it, and I honestly think I honestly think my least favorite part of Furiosa is during the end credits when they just show random scenes from Fury Road. Like, why are you doing that?
Totally agree.
You don't need to do that. But you get the sense that, like, okay, Furiosa has been part of this for a while, and she's just kind of biding her time. Whereas in the movie Furiosa, she is angry and is immediate in her kind of rage. Yeah, rage is a great way to say it. I mean, the theme of the movie is rage. Also about lines, Clint Eastwood, again, not that I think he's a great guy, but like when he was making the Man with No Name trilogy, as the movies went along, he asked for fewer and fewer lines because he's like, the character is better the less I speak. And I think that's true for the way George Miller looks at Mad Max and Furiosa for the most part. I would be interested to see how many lines of dialogue Furiosa has in the first in Fury Road. I'm sure it's more than 30 lines, but I'd be interested to see how many there are.
Even if it is, it's not like she's got these big monologues.
No, of course not.
Like, they're all very efficient with their language.
The verbose ones. Like, that's always been the case in these. The bad guys are the ones with the kind of operatic or Shakespearean dialogue, and the good guys are the the strong silent type, essentially, which
we talked about her arm and how much I loved how meaningful that was. There's another thing, and this is because I did rewatch Fury Road before, so I could do some stuff for the site. She says in Fury Road what she's looking for is redemption, but it's not totally clear what she wants redemption from. It works in Fury Road, but the way that you learn exactly what it is she does want redemption for in Furiosa, a prequel, a good prequel, should make its predecessor even better. It should make it richer. It should give it more depth. It's not just about like you said, it's not just about winks or explaining stuff. Everything should be elevated by a good prequel, and that's exactly what Furiosa does. It's great on its own. You could go into this movie having seen nothing else from any of the Mad Max movies, and it's a great movie, but working in harmony with everything both before it and, technically Fury Road comes after it, even though it just enhances everything.
So I think we have a pretty good sense of, I would imagine I know your ranking of these movies fairly well before we even talk about it. I think the question is, what's 2 and what's 3?
I don't know. I kind of think of it in terms of, it's very hard, I think, to compare the quality of filmmaking with something like Furiosa to Mad Max and Road Warrior,
Mhm.
just because it is there's just advancements in actual
Mhm.
filmmaking.
Oh, absolutely.
But in some ways, right? What stood out to me was how impressive I thought those first couple movies, and even just in terms of world building, Beyond Thunderdome is really impressive, right? Like it feels full, it feels realized, even if the film itself is not good. I think if you said to me, if I had to rank them being like you could only watch Fury Road and your number two for the rest of your life, I'd probably right now just say Furiosa, just because I would love to go back and watch on the big screen. But ask me a month from now, and I might pick either the original, which I think is almost underrated at this point,
I think it's
um,
underrated. I still think it's
or
not as good as Road Warrior, though.
yeah, I was very fascinated though by the fact that those people were living in a world that had already crumbled and they didn't realize it, and they were all just kind of pretending otherwise. Like
Mhm.
that's a really interesting dynamic that none of the other films have. But I mean, I really wouldn't fault anybody. I don't think there's any question about number one. That's obvious from us talking about it, like you
Yeah,
said.
number 1
Um,
and number 5 are as obvious as
yeah, and
anything I've
I mean, I think it's almost for me, it's more tiers. There's
Mhm.
Fury Road, then there's 1, 2, and Furiosa, and then we just kind of forget about stuff for a bit, and then we get to Beyond Thunderdome.
Mhm. And then there's yeah, boy. All the stuff I like is in the first, like, 20 minutes of Beyond Thunderdome. And
And by the way, I mean, I really hope that this opening weekend is not a sign of how this movie's going to do, because if he wants to make another one, I really want him to make another one. Like you said, he's old. How much I'm not trying to be morbid here, just in terms of physically, how much longer can he
yeah.
really do this? It's so demanding. He's obviously a marvel, but he doesn't mean he's even going to have the energy to do it if he has to wait 5 more years or something like
Mhm.
that. And I just look, I'm not a David Zaslav fan like most people who love movies, so I don't really want to get into that. But I will say this: I don't really see what the point of getting a job like that. Anybody who has any kind of power at Warner Brothers, I don't really see the point in getting to a position in life where you have that kind of power that you can greenlight George Miller making another one of these movies just so it exists so you can watch it, but then being like, meh, it's not going to turn quite the profit we wanted. Like what are you doing, right? Don't you just want to watch it? If you had this power, like if I had that power, I'd be like, yeah, go make the movie for me.
I mean, and that is truly how you can tell if the person in power is a fan of the films or of film in general, or just is somebody put in charge because they failed upward or whatever. Because, like, yeah, if you had the power to go, I get to I get to have one more George Miller Mad Max movie. Yeah, do it,
We should call him Beans for being a bean counter.
dude. I love it. Thank you all for listening to us talk about Mad Max. If you haven't seen Furiosa, please go see it. It's real good. Um, please let me know your particular ranking if you email laserfocus@nerdist.com, or let me know if you've seen any of those weird Italian Mad Max ripoffs and which one is your favorite.
You could talk
Um,
to Kyle about any Italian movie, by the way.
honestly,
Don't just limit yourself to Mad Max ripoffs.
I do love Italian movies a lot. Um, Mikey, how can people get a hold of you and your work on the internet should they choose to do so?
If you want to talk to me, you can find me on, you can message me on Twitter. I'm not really on there much. Or Blue Sky at Burger Mike, all one word. And definitely read all my pieces at the greatest website anybody ever created, nerdist.com.
I think Google's probably a better website because it has all
Not
the other
anymore.
websites. Oh, that's
Definitely
true.
not.
No, it's
Definitely
pretty.
not. Google might have had us before, but we are way ahead of Google now because we have useful information.
Wow. You can follow me on Instagram if you choose to do so at functional_nerd. You can follow me on Letterboxd. Please actually do that. Kyle_Anderson. You get to watch. Recently, I've been watching a lot of not Italian movies, but French vampire movies.
Oh,
Oh, look at all the vampires.
yes, listen, these with the terrible French accents.
Mine's pretty good. You can also, um, you can also, I think that's it. That's all the plugs, right? Yeah. Thank you all for listening to Laser Focus. I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. I will see you next time on the Laser Focus. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.